Hey guys, today's story is a little different. It's not a tale about startups or business strategy. It's not a story about beating the odds with the perfect idea or some overnight success moment. Not his one's about something quieter, colder. It's about what happens when someone laughs in your face while you're at your lowest, and how you take that moment, bottle it up, and use it to rebuild something they never thought you could. My name's Evan Hale. I'm 38 years old, and up until a couple years ago, I was a mid-level project consultant in the tech industry. Not flashy, not rich, but solid. I helped companies fix things when they broke. That's what I was good at, seeing where things would fall apart before anyone else did. What I wasn't prepared for was how fast things could collapse when it wasn't just systems but your entire life. The unraveling didn't start with a disaster. It started with a delay. A key contract didn't renew. A payment that didn't land on time. And then another client who decided to pivot their model, which, in consulting, means they've stopped paying everyone except their lawyers. Within 3 months, I went from managing a 6-figure portfolio to living off the last $5,000 in my account. That's when things got quiet. No phone calls. No new leads. And worst of all, no real plan. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed one morning, my phone open to my bank app, watching the numbers tick lower every day. Rent, credit cards, groceries. The basics suddenly looked like luxuries. Jessica, my girlfriend at the time, was starting to lose patience. We'd been together 6 years. Lived together for 4. We weren't married, but we talked about it. I thought we were solid. Turns out, I mistook comfort for commitment. The night it all fell apart, I came home with a printed spreadsheet, desperate to feel like I had some control. I laid it out on the table and said, "Okay. I've got an idea. I'm going to shut everything down and start something new. From scratch. Something I can build, not just fix." She looked at me with this tilted smile like I was a kid holding a cardboard sword, about to go fight dragons. And then she laughed. Not cruelly. Not loudly. But dismissively. Like what I'd said wasn't even worth refuting. "You," she said. "Evan, you couldn't even keep clients happy with someone else's product. You're going to build your own now?" I don't remember what I said after that. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just stood there, feeling the weight of every doubt I already had being spoken out loud by the one person who should have believed in me. She kept going, soft jabs that somehow hurt more than yelling ever could. "It's not your fault," she said. "Some people just aren't meant to build things. You're more of a steady guy, not a risk taker." That night, she didn't sleep in the same bed. The next morning, she packed a bag and told me she'd be staying with her sister until I got back on my feet. But we both knew she wasn't coming back. There was no fight. No slammed doors. Just the rustle of zippers and the sound of my future collapsing into past tense. In the days that followed, I tried to hold it together. Told myself she was just overwhelmed. That maybe if I made enough progress, she'd come back. That if I could prove I was building something, she'd believe in me again. But deep down, I knew better. Her laughter echoed in my head every time I tried to focus. Every spreadsheet I opened, every napkin sketch of an idea, I kept hearing, You couldn't even start a lawnmower." It wasn't just financial collapse I was dealing with. It was identity collapse. I'd been dismantled, quietly and efficiently, by the very person I thought would back me when everything else went dark. Eventually, I stopped waiting. I sold a few things, my watch, my second monitor, a handful of gadgets, and moved into a short-stay motel on the edge of town. It was a sterile little box of a room, with buzzing lights and a view of a dumpster. But it was quiet. And in that silence, something strange happened. I didn't give up. I got still. One morning, I sat at the tiny motel desk with a legal pad and wrote a single sentence across the top. What can I build with what I have left? Not much, at first glance. A laptop with a cracked screen. Some domain knowledge. A few contacts I hadn't burned bridges with. But that question asked honestly was the start of everything. Because it shifted my mindset from salvaging the past to designing the future. It wasn't about revenge yet. Not about proving anything. It was about survival. Creation. The first spark of something real. That week, I drafted the outline of what would later become my first real product. Not a full company. Just a tool, something niche and boring, but necessary. A back-end analytics dashboard for small remote teams that didn't have the budget for enterprise-grade systems. It wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't going to go viral. But it solved the problem. And more importantly, it gave me a reason to sit at that desk every day. And as I sat there, night after night, building line by line, there was one phrase I kept hearing in my head, not hers, but mine. If no one's coming to save you, make sure what you build saves someone else. That became my compass. My anchor. And slowly, the pain turned into focus. The laughter became fuel. And the man she walked away from? He was just getting started. The motel had no insulation. I remember that clearly because winter crept in through every window seam and rattled the vents like an old man's cough. But I didn't mind. In fact, I welcomed the discomfort. It kept me sharp. Focused. Reminded me why I was there. Most mornings started with stale coffee from the lobby and a brisk walk just to feel something other than anxiety. But by mid-morning, I was glued to that desk, breathing life into code that barely compiled and cold emailing anyone who might give me 5 minutes to talk about small-scale team infrastructure. No one was biting. And why would they? I was a man with no office, no team, no capital. Just a half-baked demo and a LinkedIn profile that looked more like a resume from someone who peaked 5 years ago. But I kept at it. Every day, I added a little more. A bug fix here. A cleaner dashboard view there. I didn't care if it was perfect, I just needed it to exist. It was around this time that I stopped checking her socials. I told myself it was out of discipline, but truthfully, I just couldn't stomach the idea of seeing her move on while I was still showering in water that never got past lukewarm. One night, I was pacing in the parking lot behind the motel, rehearsing a pitch to no one, when a beat-up Honda pulled in. Guy in a hoodie stepped out, made eye contact, then said, "You still out here working?" I laughed. "Every day." He nodded. "Keep pushing, man." It was the first encouragement I'd heard in weeks, and it came from a stranger who didn't even know my name. But it stuck. By month 3, the motel owner offered me a small discount for paying cash weekly. It was a tiny mercy, but it meant I could use the difference to buy a second-hand tablet for demos. I scraped together a few Fiverr gigs to keep the lights on. Data entry. Spreadsheet formatting. Anything that let me eat and write one more line of code. My fingers cramped from working on a busted keyboard, and some nights I fell asleep with the screen still glowing, lines of syntax bleeding into my dreams. But the product was getting better. I called it Pulse. Simple name. Short. Memorably boring in the way that good back-end tools should be. By month 4, I had something close to beta ready. That's when I found out Jessica was engaged. A mutual friend messaged me late one night, out of nowhere. "Did you hear?" I stared at the screen. "Guess she upgraded." That was the message. 4 words. 4 words that ripped open a wound I thought had already scarred over. I didn't reply. Didn't throw the phone. Didn't scream. I just closed my laptop, turned off the light, and sat there in the dark, breathing. Not because I wanted to calm down, but because I wanted to remember how it felt. That cold, hollow ache. I wanted to keep it. Use it. Because I knew something that message didn't account for. I was no longer building from bitterness, I was building from blueprint. And every time someone underestimated me, it added another layer of reinforcement to the structure. Quiet power. Quiet momentum. Pulse got its first user a few days later. A 2-person podcast team in Boise. I offered them the beta for free in exchange for feedback. They said, "Sure." No one else would build something this specific anyway. It was the worst compliment I'd ever received and the most honest. I used their notes. Tightened the code. Added a feature for remote time tracking. 2 weeks later, they recommended me to another content team. Then another. Word of mouth is slow but pure. I didn't sleep much during those days. I ran on caffeine, guilt, and spite. But for the first time in months, I felt like a builder again. Not a consultant. Not a fixer. A builder. And then came the first real offer. A marketing agency wanted to license Pulse for 12 months. It wasn't a lot. But it was enough to move out of the motel. I signed the contract on the same desk I'd built the tool on. Same buzz from the vent. Same creaking chair. But when I pressed send, I sat back and realized I'd just turned air into equity. That's not something they teach you in business school. I found a tiny studio near downtown. Nothing fancy. Just 4 white walls and a real stove. I painted one wall black. Bought a corkboard. Started pinning ideas. Expansion models. Feedback notes. Slowly, Pulse evolved. The code became cleaner. The interface smarter. And I stopped looking over my shoulder. I wasn't chasing anymore. I was steering. The best part? I didn't tell anyone. Not my old coworkers. Not mutual friends. And definitely not her. I didn't need to. Because I knew something even better was coming out of confrontation. A reveal. And when that day arrived, I wouldn't have to say a word. She'd see it for herself. The studio had terrible lighting, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor practicing trombone at midnight, but I didn't care. I had space. A desk. A window. A locked door. It was mine. Every day, I brewed my own coffee, sat down at that old second-hand laptop, and treated my tiny product like it was a Fortune 500 asset. That's the thing they never tell you: momentum isn't magic. It's maintenance. Every bug I fixed, every update I rolled out, every polite, ignored email, it was fuel. And in the quiet, Pulse began pulsing for real. Still, there were setbacks. One beta user disappeared mid-contract. Another offered to collaborate by stealing parts of my UI for his own project. I stayed calm. No flameouts. No fights. Just learning. I started reading legal documents like novels. Learned how to file a provisional patent. Taught myself how to deploy a secure backend without needing anyone's help. And all the while, her voice never quite left me. You start something? It echoed with every new milestone. But now, it wasn't a wound. It was a rhythm. 6 months in, a small VC scout messaged me. Said she'd found Pulse through a write-up someone did on niche SaaS tools for micro teams. Clean, focused, and weirdly powerful, she wrote. I laughed out loud when I read that. She wanted to chat. We had a call. Nothing flashy. Just questions. Background. Numbers. But she liked what she saw. Let's keep in touch, she said. That was all. Just 5 words. But I knew they meant something. Around that time, I got invited to a private Slack group for indie founders. I'd never been in a room, virtual or otherwise, where people talked openly about revenue, churn, and investor BS without ego. It felt like breathing fresh air after months underground. I didn't say much at first. Just listened. Watched. Learned. But when I finally dropped a screenshot of Pulse's dashboard update, a few people took notice. "Is that open source? What stack are you using? We've been looking for something like this." One guy met me. A YouTuber with 800k subs. Said he was about to launch a team collaboration platform and needed back-end monitoring. We set up a call. He signed a 3-month license the next day. That deal gave me my first real revenue cushion. I upgraded my laptop. Bought proper headphones. And I remember vividly, that night I walked into a coffee shop not to kill time, but because I wanted to work somewhere with people again. I ordered a tea, sat by the window, opened my inbox, and there it was. Her name. Jessica. Subject line: "Look who made it." I stared at it for a long time before clicking. The message was short. "Saw the product. Congrats. Knew you had it in you. Crazy how things work out." No apology. No acknowledgement of what she said. Just that condescending warmth of someone who suddenly remembers your name because they saw it in someone else's post. I didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. I just archived it. Because her words didn't matter anymore. I'd already answered them. Not with an argument, but with a company. 1 week later, I got invited to a startup panel. One of the speakers dropped out, and someone from that Slack group recommended me. "He's building something real," they said. So I spoke. Nervous as hell, but prepared. I didn't wear a suit. Just a black t-shirt and jeans. I told the room the truth. That Pulse was born in a motel room, coded between cheap meals and bad sleep. That I didn't raise capital until I had customers. That I didn't build it to go viral. I built it because I knew people needed it, even if they didn't know it yet. After the panel, a guy approached me. Late 50s. Said he ran ops for a publishing group. Asked if I could demo Pulse for his distributed editorial team. We met the next week. 2 weeks later, they signed a 12-month deal. By now, I had enough revenue to hire a contract developer. Then a second. We weren't a startup yet. Not officially. But we were something. Something real. Something undeniable. And in all of this, every win, every obstacle overcome, there was no moment where I thought, "Now I've shown her." That's the thing about true growth. The person who hurt you stops being the point. She had simply played her role. The real story? That was mine. And it was just getting started. There's a moment in every build where things begin to hum. Not the loud kind of success people post about with champagne and rooftop selfies, but a deeper, grounded frequency. You wake up, and instead of wondering what will go wrong, you start asking what could go better. Pulse had reached that moment. The product worked. The clients were renewing. My name was starting to circulate in the corners of the industry I used to admire from afar. And then came the break. A tech journalist, someone I didn't know but followed online, messaged me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Heard about Pulse through a contact. Would love to do a short founder feature, something gritty. You up for that?" My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't ready. I didn't have a proper office. My team was 2 guys on different time zones and me in a studio apartment with chipped paint and a coffee maker that coughed before brewing. But then I remembered who I'd been just a year ago, shaking in a motel room, wondering if I'd ever be more than a footnote in someone else's story. So I said yes. The interview wasn't flashy. She asked smart questions. I gave honest answers. Talked about the grind. The failures. The fact that Pulse wasn't built to be sexy, it was built to be reliable. The piece went live 2 weeks later. It wasn't viral, but it traveled. Enough to get picked up by a few newsletters. Enough to land me on the radar of people who normally wouldn't take cold pitches. And enough, apparently, for someone at Forbes to read it. I got the email at midnight. Subject: Quick Forbes feature Pulse. At first, I thought it was spam. But no, it was real. A short form, hustle to headline, story for their Rising Entrepreneur series. I said yes, of course. We did the interview. They sent a photographer. And when the piece dropped 3 weeks later, I was on the digital front page with the caption: From rock bottom to back-end backbone, how one founder quietly built a startup powering the underdogs. I'll never forget the moment I saw it. I was on the subway. My phone buzzed with a message from one of my early users. Just a link and one word: dude. I clicked. And there I was. Plain black t-shirt, arms folded, eyes tired but clear. The piece wasn't just about Pulse. It was about resilience. About starting with nothing. About the silence between failure and reinvention. It was everything I had wanted to say but never thought anyone would hear. That night, I got another message. From her. Jessica. Wow, it read. Didn't expect to see your face on Forbes. Congrats. Maybe you always had it, and I just couldn't see it back then. Life's weird. I didn't respond. Not because I was bitter, but because there was nothing to say. Her laugh had once echoed in my head like a verdict. Now, it was background noise. Something distant. Powerless. I closed the message, turned off my phone, and walked to the window. The city was glowing, alive with movement. Somewhere in those buildings, people were starting companies, ending relationships, making choices they'd later regret or celebrate. And here I was part of it. Not watching from the sidelines. Not surviving. Participating. Building. A week later, Pulse hit a growth spurt. The press brought in new users. Our servers buckled. I didn't panic. I hired someone who knew how to scale infrastructure. Paid him up front. He said, "Most founders try to cheap out here." I just smiled. I'd been broke before. Not going back there. As the company grew, so did the decisions. Should we raise? Stay lean? Build for acquisition or legacy? I kept my head down and my team tight. I didn't care about hypergrowth. I cared about trust. About reputation. About proving that what we built mattered. Quiet power, I reminded myself. Not noise. Then came the gala. An invite-only event for founders and investors hosted by a media partner of the Forbes list. Black tie. Rooftop venue. Big names. I almost skipped it. But something in my curiosity, told me to go. So I rented a tux, polished my shoes, and walked into a room filled with people who used to ignore my emails. That's where I saw her. Jessica. She was standing near the bar, glass in hand, laughing at something a man beside her said. She looked up, spotted me, and froze. Her face didn't change, but her posture did. Slightly stiff. Like a memory she wasn't ready for had just walked through the door. I didn't walk over. I didn't need to. We'd already had our final conversation. She just didn't know it. The moment held longer than it should have. Jessica's eyes stayed locked on mine for a breath too long, like she was trying to read a headline printed behind my eyes. She blinked first, turned slightly, repositioned her classic social deflection. I'd seen her do it at old parties when someone brought up politics or a topic she didn't want to discuss. But this wasn't a topic. This was a man she left behind standing under crystal chandeliers, 3 inches taller, sharper, calmer than he'd ever been. I didn't smirk. Didn't nod. Just let the silence settle. The best kind of revenge is when you no longer need to deliver it yourself. I turned and headed toward the hosts, greeted a few industry folks I now called peers. They were talking metrics, funding rounds, tech stack rumors. But my mind was strangely still. That room, with its glitter and catered charm, felt like a set. A temporary theater for people performing confidence. And I wasn't performing. I didn't need to anymore. The armor had become skin. About 20 minutes later, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there she was. Closer now. Nervous energy cloaked in her best perfume. "Evan," she said, like she was trying it on again after months in storage. I gave a polite smile. "Jessica." She paused, eyes scanning me, like she was cataloging all the changes she didn't think were possible. "You look good. Really good." I nodded. "Thanks. You too." Another pause. She glanced around. "I saw the Forbes piece. You really built something, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "I did." Her mouth twitched like she was about to say something meaningful. Instead, she offered a practice line. "I'm happy for you." It didn't land. Not because she wasn't sincere, but because it didn't matter anymore. Her validation was a currency I'd stopped accepting. There was a beat of silence. She looked down at her glass. "You know, when we broke up, I really didn't think." She trailed off. Then, with just enough vulnerability to sound real, she said, "I didn't expect this." "You." It should have felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt distant. Like someone telling you they regret selling your old guitar after you've just composed your own symphony. "I know," I said quietly. "Neither did I. But sometimes you don't know what's in you until there's no one left to believe in it but you." She didn't have a response. Just a quiet nod, eyes glistening a little. Maybe from the champagne. Maybe from something else. "Well," she said, stepping back. "I should get back to my table." "You should," I echoed, not harshly, just factually. She turned, walked away, and that was it. No apology. No explosion. Just closure sealed in the simplest way. Her realizing I'd healed in places she didn't know I could. Later that night, one of the event organizers introduced me to an investor interested in tools for the creator economy. We talked shop for a while. Nothing formal, but promising. As I stood near the balcony overlooking the city, glass of water in hand, I thought back to the night in that motel room, the flickering lights, the cracked screen, the voice in my head telling me I wasn't finished. That man wouldn't recognize this version of me. But he'd be proud. Not for the gala, or the article, or even the company, but because I didn't stay down. I built from nothing and didn't ask anyone to clap. Before I left the gala, I took one last look around the room. Not to find her, but to find myself in it. I saw a man who no longer carried resentment like luggage. A man who turned pain into architecture. The foundation had been betrayal. But the structure? That was mine. Designed in silence. Built with conviction. As I stepped into the cold night air, the city buzzed below. Cars moved like veins of light. Somewhere out there, another version of me was breaking. Losing everything. Getting laughed at. And maybe, just maybe, that person would hear this story someday and realize, your story's not over when they leave. It's just finally yours. The months after the gala didn't feel like a victory lap. They felt like maintenance. Pulse was growing, and with growth came problems, real ones. Server load, client onboarding, managing a remote team across 4 time zones. But I welcomed them like old friends. This was the kind of chaos I could live with. I'd learned how to breathe underwater by now, and nothing felt like drowning anymore. We brought on a product manager, then a legal consultant. I was no longer in the weeds daily, but I never let my fingerprints fade from the code or the mission. And for the first time, people were coming to Minute the other way around. Every week brought a new email from someone asking how Pulse came to be. They wanted the backstory, the "how'd you survive it?" moment. I always hesitated before answering. Not because I didn't want to share, but because I didn't want to mythologize it. There wasn't a single turning point. There was just quiet pain, followed by stubborn persistence. And somewhere along the way, that turned into product market fit. I didn't make Pulse because I believed in myself. I made it because I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I upgraded from the studio to a modest townhouse just outside the city. It wasn't flash white walls, a real kitchen, enough space for a standing desk and a thinking chair. I started walking in the mornings again. No headphones. Just footsteps, breath, and the distant hum of a city I'd finally claimed a piece of. I still had the Forbes feature framed in my hallway not as proof to others, but as a timestamp for myself. The day the world started listening. Then, one evening, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. But the handwriting, I recognized it. Jessica. The same looping J I'd once traced with my thumb during lazy Sunday mornings. The message inside was short. I was wrong. About what you could be. About what you were already becoming when I walked away. I hope you never forget how far you came. No apology. No ask. Just those words. It didn't sting. It didn't lift me either. It just landed. Like an envelope dropped gently on a desk. Meaningful. But not defining. I placed the letter in a drawer. Not to keep it closed, but to keep it from needing space on the wall. It didn't belong there. That space was for the things I built, not for the things that tried to break me. Weeks later, I was asked to keynote a small conference for bootstrapped founders. The theme was resilience without noise. Fitting. I stood on that stage in a black crew neck, speaking to a room of wide eyes, sleepless builders, dreamers still licking wounds. I told them the truth. That being laughed at doesn't mean you're wrong. That a quiet rebuild is more powerful than a loud collapse. That redemption, when it arrives, often doesn't shout. It whispers. And if you're listening, it sounds like your own voice finally believing itself. After the talk, someone from the back approached me. Mid-20s, holding a cheap laptop bag with duct tape on the corner. He didn't introduce himself. Just said, "Thanks." I thought I was the only one. I shook his hand and said, "You're never the only one. You just feel like it while it's happening." And I knew that was the full circle moment. Not the magazine covers. Not the gala. Not the letter. It was that single sentence, spoken quietly between strangers, that said everything louder than headlines ever could. That night, I walked home through the rain. Not rushed. Not burdened. Just calm. I unlocked the door to my house, lit a candle in the corner near the window, and sat down with my old notebook, the one from the motel. I flipped to the last page. It was blank. I picked up a pen and wrote, "No more proving. Just building." And I meant it. Sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all. Not because you've forgiven, but because you've outgrown the part of yourself that still needed to be seen by the ones who walked away. I didn't build Pulse to impress Jessica, or to prove anything to my family, or to wave a flag in front of the people who once labeled me a failure. I built it because, in the wreckage of my old life, I found something worth protecting: my own voice. My own vision. My own damn name. There's a strange peace that comes after survival. Not joy. Not celebration. Just Stillness. You stop running. You stop replaying every insult, every smirk, every dismissal. You no longer rehearse the perfect comeback. Because now, your life is the comeback. Quiet, sturdy, undeniable. You don't need to say, "I told you so," when your presence says it for you. I learned that you can't control how others see you. You can only control what you build in the silence after they stop looking. That's where the real power begins, in the echo, in the loneliness, in the work no one claps for. And eventually, if you do it right, the ones who laughed will be forced to sit in the quiet you've mastered. And listen. So if you're watching this and you've been pushed aside, underestimated, or told you weren't enough, know this: the story isn't over. In fact, it's finally yours. Write it. Shape it. Live it like no one's watching until one day, they all are. But by then, you won't need them to be.